Hi, everybody. This is Marie from the Innovation Group, and welcome to another webinar brought to you by Emerging Leaders of Gaming and the Innovation Group. I just want to give you a brief overview on the functionality of GoToWebinar before we get started. So you should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation that I'm sharing with you, and this slide shows where your various windows are, including panelist cameras, this PowerPoint presentation, which is available in the handouts window, and the control panel. You can choose to follow along with us to view the presentation or download it directly and go through it at your own speed. The next slide shows how to expand any of these separate windows to go to full screen. Just click on the double arrows on the bottom right corner of your selected window, or to escape full screen, click those arrows again or hit the escape button. You can also minimize and maximize your control panel by clicking the orange arrow at the top. You'll notice that you're automatically muted throughout the webinar, but to ask questions, expand your control panel and look toward the bottom right in the questions section. Just type your question and hit send, and we'll reserve 10 minutes at the end to cover as many questions as possible. If you're on a mobile phone, your functionality will be slightly more limited, but you'll see your menu items at the bottom. To toggle back and forth between panelist cameras and the presentation, swipe from left to right. And to advance through the presentation on your own, since you won't be able to see ours live, swipe down for each new slide. The menu also shows where you can access the presentation, also called handouts, or ask a question. As for frequently asked questions, if you run into any technical issues during this webinar, call the GoToWebinar customer service team at the number that I've been displaying at the tops of all these slides. Also, we will post a recording of this webinar on our Emerging Leaders page within the next week, so stay tuned for that. And now here's the Innovation Group's Operations Planning Director, Mike Vinaski, to kick things off.
Thanks for the tech instructions, Marie. As she said, my name is Mike Vinaski, and I'm Director of Operations Planning here at the Innovation Group. We have a bit of a different format for today's webinar. We'll be doing a one-on-one interview featuring moderator Dr. David Schwartz of UNLV and Dr. Brian Wyman of Innovation Analytics. Innovation Analytics recently completed a sports betting survey, and the interview will cover the highlights as well as other topics related to the emerging domestic sports betting industry. With that, I'll introduce Dr. Schwartz and Dr. Wyman. David Schwartz is the Director for the Center of Gaming Research at UNLV. He's been with the department since 2001 and is also a part-time instructor in the Department of History. David is the author of several books, including Roll the Bones, The History of Gambling. He earned his bachelor's degree as well as his master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania before he earned his doctorate in U.S. history from UCLA. Brian Wyman is a principal consultant at Innovation Analytics. Brian holds a Ph.D. in mathematics from the University of Michigan and specializes in advanced modeling and predictive methods. Before joining Innovation Analytics, Brian most recently oversaw marketing and gaming analytics for Pinnacle Entertainment. I'll turn it over to David and Brian now to kick off the interview.
Hey, thank you, Mike. So, Brian, can you tell us a little bit about the survey that you conducted?
Oh, thanks, Dave, for kicking it off. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. And, thanks to everybody for joining the webinar. The survey we conducted was really the result of, quite a bit of back and forth with a number of potential clients in the sports betting space. And everyone had questions about the market sizing, which has been a core focus of work that the Innovation Group has done over the past really 30 years. And so they said, we've seen all these estimates that have come out in white papers, and they're all based on these high-level comps. They're comping to Nevada, which is unique in many ways, or they're comping to Europe, which may or may not be a good comparison for the United States. And so we took the same approach that we tend to take when we analyze issues in marketing, which is, well, have we asked the customers yet? And so what we decided to do was go ahead to market and put together a small to medium-sized sample of potential consumers in the sports betting space, and really try to understand who are they, what are their likely behavior types, and is there anything else that we can glean about them that will help us either size the market or understand really what the implementation of sports betting should look like. So the survey that we actually put together, we sent to 5 different states, and in those states we tried to balance the population that we sent the survey to so that it looked representative of the U.S. population. So we balanced these survey participants on a number of different things. So age was one, gender was one, and income was the other. So when you look at our survey respondents, they look like the United States as a whole in terms of those three metrics, or three characteristics rather. And what we did was we upfront, asked qualifiers. I mean, qualifiers means they had to be an adult and they had to live in one of the states that we were surveying. And we asked them a screener question, which just said, hey, listen, if sports betting were legal and regulated in your environment, in your state, would you be likely to place a bet on an individual game in the next 12 months? And if they said no, we thanked them for their time. And if they said yes, then we proceeded to ask them a number of different other questions that, again, we're trying to get at, current and potential future behaviors. So we started by asking these folks about their current gaming behaviors. Where do you game? How often do you game? How much do you game in terms of dollars? And then we really pushed toward their future habits and things that they would like to see in sports betting. We asked them, for several individual sports, how likely they'd be to place a sports bet in that sport, how often they'd be likely to place a sports bet in that sport, and it would be very difficult to get reasonable information if we asked them how many times a year are you likely to bet on an NBA basketball game. But they will know more along the lines of how many times a week during the NBA season would you be likely to place a bet on a basketball game. And so we tried to ask our questions in that way, so that we were asking questions that were in line with how people think about their own wagering behavior. We also asked them where they'd like to place sports bets. Is this something that you want to do at a casino? Is this something you want to do on your mobile phone, online? Is this something you want to do at a lottery vending machine? Those kind of questions. And we also got at a few ancillary questions that were, of interest to us. Would you be interested in betting at a stadium while you're watching the game? How comfortable do you feel with the sports betting terminology today, or reading odds? Things like that, trying to get a sense of how sophisticated the market is. So that's really, what brings us here today is to kind of suss out some of the things that we've learned from that process.
Nice. Can you talk a little bit about how you're approaching the sizing of the market and how some of your methodologies are different from the way other people have tried to estimate the size of the market? Because that's definitely a question I get asked an awful lot.
Yeah, and us too. And again, this is sort of what prompted the whole endeavor to begin with. And so, our approach, which, a lot of times, even when we're doing studies of potential amenity ads or hotel ads, we're using comparisons to others that have been constructed. But in sports betting, most of the folks that tried to estimate the size of the market in white papers and so on were doing exactly that. They were using comparative methods and looking at data that was collected from the European markets and data that's available from Nevada. And again, our potential clients and friends in the industry were had the same concerns that we did, which is like, this is probably a good first order estimate, but how do I know that my market is really going to behave like these other markets? And so our approach was really, let's go out to the market, ask the consumers about their betting frequencies and their betting behaviors, their bet sizing. Are you going to be making $100 bets, $10 bets, $1,000 bets, $25 bets? And we saw people, reporting that they would make that entire range of average wagers. And so what we tried to do was do a ground up market sizing. So we really tried to construct from the bottom what percentage of the population is going to be betting, how frequently will they be betting, what's the size of their bets, and how do their bets break down, within the various sports, sports that they could bet on.
Interesting. So how big do you think the sports betting market could potentially be in the United States?
Yeah, well, and so from the papers that we've looked at, that were out there, we've seen estimates ranging from in the $6 billion to the $12 billion range. In our own study, our first estimate, and I should say about the survey that this is kind of constantly evolving. As we're working with new clients, many of them are asking us, say, hey, can you go out into my market and talk to my, market participants and ask them the same questions, because that's going to be more compelling when I take it to my legislators or when we're, really talking about putting meaningful investment behind this. We want to make sure that, the fact that you surveyed in these states, again, is it the right market comp, right? So as we get more data, our estimates of everything in the study are revising, but they're pretty stable right now at around the $8 billion mark, which is it's consistent with the other estimates, which is always good, because it's a little bit of confirmation that everybody's thinking about this, even though it's in different ways. We're kind of coming to the same reasonable market size there.
Okay. So how would state governments and operators use this information from the survey if you were to break it down state by state?
Yeah, and it's tricky, right? Because oftentimes we get asked by folks, hey, listen, I don't want to spend the money to go out into my market and talk to only those people. Can you tell me, can we basically just take a run rate and apply it to my state's population? And to some extent you can, but really the problem is that markets aren't really drawn along state lines, right? And so if you have a state government that wants to know, okay, well, what's your estimate, given the methodology you use, what's your estimate of such and such state's market size? I mean, the answer is really tricky, right? Because this really depends on the legislative environments in neighboring states and how much draw your state has from markets at those intersections. So what we're trying to do with our clients today is better define what's the market area that you have pulls from, and of course how does this play with various legislative environments, right? I mean, the $8 billion, that number assumes that everyone has access to sports betting, which if a state legislates only brick and mortar gaming, for sports betting, then there will be people that are prohibitively far away from the ability to sports bet, and so we have to adjust our market sizing in those jurisdictions accordingly.
Okay. So what do you think operators, which could include, who do you think is going to be best positioned? Which entities do you think will be best positioned if sports betting is regulated?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? So if it really depends on the type of legislation that's introduced. So for example, if a state comes online and says, we'll have as many licenses as we can sell out there, and online betting is fine, mobile betting is fine, then the best positioned entities are going to be your big commercial operators that have facilities in many states and who have the ability to establish really good relationships with, for example, the major European online operators. This will be a great thing for them. In states that that legislate only brick and mortar sports betting. Now tribal facilities have have a great opportunity to compete with the commercials in the same way that they're competing in slots and table games today. So really, I think it depends a lot on the legislative angles that are taken.
So you spoke about limiting it to brick and mortar. Are there advantages to having limited access versus full access?
Well, in terms of realizing the full capacity of the market, I don't think that there's much advantage to limiting. I think that if states are looking to maximize their own tax receipts, then you want to tap into really the full market there, and to do that you try to facilitate gaming in every way possible. But I mean, just like with, again, slots and table games and the coming online of online gaming in some states, there's considerations to think about when you're trying to put gaming online. Whether those are technological and concerns about game integrity, or access and availability and problem gaming. So yes, there are reasons to go with a limited access model. There's also a compelling argument to go to an open access model, and I think based on what we know, these are the discussions that are happening in state legislatures right now. And then of course you also have the Nevada hybrid model, right, where people have to have accounts at their local sports book, but then they're able to load and withdraw money from that using a card, and they're able to wager on their mobile phone. So it's kind of it's not quite an open access model, but it definitely facilitates wagering by people who live prohibitively far from their local brick and mortar facility.
Nice. So where are customers or consumers most excited about betting on sports?
Yeah, and we asked them, hey, look, where do you guys want to bet? And without fail, their first priority was to bet at the casino. And
okay.
When we looked at their responses to this, what we saw is that their responses really lined up with their familiarity with the locations. So, for example, casinos were the most popular place, but people also said, hey, look, I'd also love to bet at lottery vending machines. I'd love to bet at on mobile, and I'd love to bet in a convenience store. If I can go to my 7-Eleven and buy a lottery ticket and bet on the Yankees, that's a great thing, right? But what we saw that was sort of surprising was that they shied away from saying that they would bet at a standalone retail sports betting location. And I mean, this is counterintuitive to me, at least, because that's effectively the same as betting at a convenience store. Maybe with the exception of you have to pull into the parking lot and park there, and people will see you walk in and they know what you're going in and what your intent is at that point, right? So that could be what's going on here, and that I don't want to project. We're just trying to understand what the people are saying here. But it really seems to me that the survey respondents are likely not very familiar with standalone retail sports betting locations, and so as online was another thing. They weren't super excited about betting online, and our thought is as they gain exposure to these entities and to these options, they may become more comfortable with them and bet in them more. Now, the flip side of that, when you talked about, you asked a minute ago about advantages of limited access versus open access. From the folks that we did see who were betting online today, and we asked them again about their current gaming behaviors, and they said, yeah, I bet online. whether that's through legal and state sanctioned methods or not. Their volumes tended to be a lot higher than folks who just bet at brick and mortar facilities. And so, the idea is that there may be a lot of upside in terms of market size in facilitating alternative methods of being able to place wagers.
Nice. So,
Dave, I think I accidentally ran over one of these questions. My fingers were too fast, and I think I skipped this one. If you wouldn't mind covering this one.
Sure. So tell us a little bit about what operators should be thinking as they try to develop a strategy for sports betting.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that we're hearing, and this was at ICE in London, and I mean on the phone all the time with folks, is people adopting a kind of, well, we're going to wait and let the Supreme Court rule, and then we'll think about dipping our toes in the water. And as folks are waiting for this to happen, states behind the scenes are developing the core of their legislation. They're putting they're putting information in about who's going to get the licenses. They're putting information in about tax rates, right? And these are things that operators, certainly the commercial operators and tribal operators, should care a lot about. And so I think even if you're unsure of whether this is a route that you want to pursue, I think it's really important to get in front of this and start having those conversations with the legislators. And so, there are several estimates out there of state market sizes, and you can probably do a quick first order estimate of how big your own market is, in order to get a sense of how much do I want to spend pursuing this avenue. But I really think it's important for the operators and the legislators to work together on this, particularly on tax rates, where the operators are going to bring to the table a lot of issues that it's apparent that legislators aren't always considering. And the example of this that's pretty interesting is that Poland last year, of all places, enacted a 12% tax on handle, right? And so if you think about a sports book that's holding 6% of handle as it is, maybe up to 8% in some pretty in some European environments and other places, but 6 to 8% is their hold. Well, 12% tax on handle just makes the game completely unwinnable from a house perspective, and so you the only way you can overcome that is to juice the patrons more. You have to increase the prices, which makes the game less fun. It makes the frequency of winning less, and we have this conversation about slot machines too, but I mean this really puts your pricing model into the environment where consumers will feel it quickly, and also it'll facilitate black market wagering, right? I mean, if the prices go up, it's not like the consumers are going to stop sports betting. They're just going to bet with a bookie, or they're going to find the alternate ways to do it that they're doing today. And so, when I look at the bills that are being introduced in states across the country, I don't see very many taxes on handle. I do see one, but yeah, I mean, GGR tax, even the gaming tax here, states have numbers ranging from in the 6% range to Delaware has basically a 60% tax on win. And so it probably behooves operators to start having those conversations with their legislators so that the environment is something that can work for really everybody involved.
Okay. So what's
Dave, let me just a minute. Another interesting thing that came out of the survey was that something like 90% of potential sports bettors are casino customers today. And so when you talk about what should operators be thinking about, the value of their database is immense, because this is not a new untapped market, although there are definitely new market participants. These are customers that you already know, you already have relationships with. And so, you can start to think about, what's my marketing program going to look like? We've already talked about how they like gaming in familiar environments. Again, they're already in your database. So I think between that and the sort of get in front of it from the legislative perspective, and understand too that first mover advantage is going to be key here. If you've got a state and you're kind of on the border, and the state next door legalizes sports betting, and you're going to see a hit to your brick and mortar gaming. So it's not just about capturing new market, this different revenue stream. It's about protecting the existing one, and I think that's a really compelling point for legislators also that are under increasing pressures with regards to tax receipts and budgetary constraints.
I see. So can you tell us what sports consumers were most excited about betting on?
Well, I mean, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody on this call that people want to bet on football. We estimate that about a quarter of the bets out there, according to our customers, will be on NFL games, right? And so, and more than that when you start to bake in NCAA football. People are really excited about betting on football. They're really excited about betting basketball, both college and professional basketball. In terms of, you have the people that say, yes, I'll bet on hockey, but it's typically infrequent. You have people that say they'll bet on baseball, and those guys are baseball fans, and they estimate they'll bet a little bit heavier on baseball. What was really interesting was when we got into the kind of alternative sports, and 45%, or make sure I have this number right here, 46% of folks who responded, that they are would-be sports bettors, said that they have interest in betting on boxing and MMA, which I knew that was very popular. I love watching MMA myself, but I would not have guessed that of sports bettors, 45 or 46% of them had an interest in betting on it. And again, this is a survey, right? We went to market, we asked people these questions. They may be responding that they want to see those listed on the card as betting options, and maybe not 46% of them would make a bet in a given year. But the fact remains that that number was not that high, for example, on soccer or tennis or golf. It could be timing, but lots of people were excited about the idea of betting on the Olympics. We ran a survey in January, which is kind of right before the Olympics started, and people were pumped up. Like, the Olympics outperformed tennis and golf in terms of interest in betting from would-be sports bettors. And so, MMA, auto racing, those were the two big ones. But I thought it was really interesting that the Olympics came in that high. And again, the numbers on MMA and boxing just kind of blew me out of the water. And about a third of our respondents said that they would have interest in betting on auto racing and on the Olympics. So pretty, again, not what I would have expected as an analyst or as a sports bettor myself, but pretty interesting stuff.
And did you get any sense of how often bettors were likely to bet?
Yeah, we did. And, again, it ranged pretty dramatically from some obviously pretty sophisticated in the sense that they understand sports betting because they do it quite a bit. Folks who responded to, the people that reported that they would make one NFL bet a year, and I bet everybody can guess what that's going to look like. On our kind of median sports bettor, and again, we had this is a paid survey, so a couple of people, they're getting their $2 for completing the survey, and they just fill in, blanks randomly, and so we're still going through a process of making sure that the integrity of the data is great. But when you just look at the median, which shouldn't be really impacted at all by those kind of outlier responses, when you look at the median, we're looking at like 30 times a year. So wagering on maybe your core sports, football, basketball, baseball, hockey, something like once every 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah, as a median, right? I mean, there's plenty of folks who are going to be far lower volume, but there's also plenty of folks that are pretty high volume bettors.
Interesting. Was there anything else you learned from the survey?
We did. I thought it was phenomenally interesting. 65% of the would-be sports bettors said that they have an interest in the ability to wager at the stadium. And,
really?
My initial thought on that was that number is very high.
Mm-hmm.
And that there would be some purists out there who, even though they loved sports wagering and even though they loved sports, wouldn't want to necessarily commingle the two. And that just turns out to be wrong. And the intuition that others have given me is like, look, you don't go to the horse races to watch the horses. I think that folks really think that a wager on a game makes the experience a lot more interesting, a lot better. And so why not have the ability to do that in a legal, regulated, last-minute way that I don't have to plan for? If I'm going to Dodger Stadium, I think that really does enhance the experience for a lot of folks, and the survey bore that out. I was also surprised that at the self-ratings of familiarity with things like key sports betting terminology and the ability to read lines and spreads and understand exactly what that means. And just in my day-to-day life, talking to people, they don't actually have a good sense of what does it mean that something's minus 115, or what does it mean that you're taking so-and-so plus 4.5. But the respondents to the survey really, they said, no, we really get that, and again, we're excited about it.
Interesting. So can you talk a little bit about the proposed integrity fees, which are all in the news these days, and what impact you think they would have on the industry as it develops?
Yeah, the integrity fees are not something that's unique to this country. They exist in a lot of European markets, as I'm sure many of the folks on the webinar are aware. I look at it in a couple different ways. One, you asked about what impact they would have on the industry, and from an industry perspective, this is a 1% tax on handle, right? And again, if we go back to the idea, the notion that books are holding 5% or 6%, I mean, a 1% handle tax is effectively 20% tax on win. Right. So if you're in one of these markets, I mean, Pennsylvania just passed, and they've got 36%, of taxes baked in there, 34 to the state, and then you get a municipal tax and a county tax at 1% apiece. And now you tack on another, call it 20% for the league integrity fees. And again, like, sports betting is not slot machines. It's a lot more labor intensive, right? And so I worry in environments where we're attached to the integrity fee, which I don't think on the surface is a terribly bad thing, but we're also taxing pretty heavily on the state side. Now, the idea of maintaining the integrity of our sporting events is obviously attractive to pretty much everyone that doesn't have sort of nefarious motives. But what I don't know, and this is not my area of expertise, is whether integrity fees people feel like are effective in actually maintaining the integrity of sporting events. And so, I'm not really prepared to comment on that, but I think it's worth asking the question. I also think I'm not really compelled by the league's arguments that hey, listen, without the league, you guys wouldn't have sports betting, so we're sort of owed a piece to begin with. Because I think it's really a two-way street, right? I mean, there's a lot of folks who would turn to the NFL and go, hey, if it weren't for sports betting, the league would be a lot less popular than it is today. And so, I think there's a lot of back and forth there between sports betting, wagering as an industry, and the leagues as an industry. And so, again, I don't have a strong opinion on whether the integrity fees should be there or shouldn't be there, but at least let's have honest conversation around it and try to get to, is this actually helping, everybody, do better. So.
Sounds real good. So you've done this survey. Obviously, this is an area where there can be a ton more research. So can you tell me a little bit about what gets you excited about doing your research and analysis in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the fact of the matter is, I've been a poker player for a long time. And, I moved to Las Vegas 4 years ago, and, I sports bet avidly. And I love watching sports. And as I've kind of said in the past, it's always better to have a little bit of sweat on the game. But, so I guess my own personal excitement about the industry keeps me going about research and analysis in the space. But look, I love the gaming industry, and that's why I work in it. And I'm excited about this being not just a new revenue stream, because again, the tax rates are high, and it is a lot of money. But compared to the existing gaming industry, it's not going to be a complete game changer. However, I think that the volumes that we'll get from sports betting will also increase volumes in other areas of the casinos. I think it's going to do a lot for the gaming floor. I think it'll do a lot for F&B. I don't know about hotel as much, but yeah, I mean, I think this is just going to be really impactful to the industry as a whole, and I'm excited to be a part of it and try to help our clients figure out how best to leverage it.
Nice. Well, I believe we now have time for audience Q&A. If we have any questions.
I think I've got the questions list over here, and I don't know if Marie is still on and wants to remind people about how to ask questions if you have them. A couple of people have figured it out.
Sure.
Go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. You're fine. I'm seeing the questions. If you guys would like to ask some questions, you should be able to see basically a series of gray menus at the bottom of your main control panel menu, and you should see the word questions there somewhere. And then when you click on that, you should see the option to be able to type it out and press send. Looks like we've got 4 so far, 5 now.
Yeah, I've got a handful up here. I'll just start at the top and see. You said $8 billion, which states does that include? All states or just the first movers? Our $8 billion number was calculated on a basis of, I believe, 40 states. There were about 10 states that we had anticipated would be very unlikely to adopt any sort of sports betting legislation. And so it's not really just first mover, but it's also not all 50 states. And so we pushed our this primary research data into the 40 or 41 states that we anticipate having some form of sports betting in the next few years. And again, the $8 billion assumes that there's access to everybody. And in many places that's not the case if we only adopt brick and mortar gaming, which as you take a look through the 20 or so states that have bills that they've either passed or put forward, several of them are brick and mortar only. Additionally, someone asks, did you ask about same asker. Okay, did you ask about the likelihood or percentage of existing gray market bettors that will convert if legal rather than staying with a gray market site? I can tell you we did ask that question. So pretty, not surprisingly, many folks who bet with a gray market or black market betting today said that they would convert, but there's still a percentage of them that said that they would stay, but it's very low. I think the overall likelihood of someone betting on the gray or black market post-legislation, post-regulation was very, very small. I don't have the number immediately in front of me, but I do have your name qualitatively. I know it reduces quite a bit, and I can get to that and send that across. Let's see. What was the number of people that wanted to bet, or what was the percent of people that wanted to bet in stadium? We asked the question. Let me see if I have it, but the way that we asked it was, it was like, I support sports betting in the stadium and I would do it. I support sports betting in the stadium and I wouldn't do it. I don't support sports betting in the stadium, but I would still go to the games. And I don't support sports betting in the stadium and I would no longer go to the games. That was the way we asked that question. And the percentage of people that supported sports betting in the stadium and would sports bet in the stadium was around 65%. So again, pretty large response there from folks. Let's see. Have you been involved in discussions and I'm taking these on the fly, so fingers crossed here. Have you been involved in discussions regarding what type of venue the sports betting should ideally be participated in, i.e. focus on sports betting spaces and rooms within a casino, or whole access where you bet in your hotel room, et cetera, and will regulations permit out of casino betting? A couple of questions that were asked here. We did not ask about on-site, meaning at the casino, but not necessarily in the sports book betting, and that's a good question. I know that many places have adopted mobile technology where you can check out a tablet and wager that way as long as you're on property. So a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. Will regulations permit out of casino betting? This really varies from state to state. We've done a kind of a compilation of what the bills look like out there, and they are very, very wide-ranging. So some states have, full online or mobile. Other states, it's brick and mortar only. And most states, they say, well, we can do this, but or rather, some states say you can sports bet, but we're not going to say much more than that in terms of what the regulations say so far. Do you have information about sports betting in Canada? Great question. We did not go to the Canadian market with this survey. So from the survey perspective, no. We have a little bit of information about sports betting in Canada from a comp perspective, but yeah, no, not for this survey. We didn't. How do you think hometown biases or betting will skew betting lines? They will be very unbalanced as compared to Vegas, where you see a variety of bettors. This is a great question. We were actually having this conversation in my kitchen the other night, several of us. I think it's going to be incredibly interesting and what it may end up facilitating where possible. And look, state lines is going to be such an interesting thing to think about legislatively. But you can imagine some of the major operators either skewing lines by book, which is kind of the natural choice, so that bettors in New York have to pay a little extra vig on the Yankees than bettors elsewhere. Of course, there are enough savvy people in any market that if you skew the lines too much, then people will start to bet the other side, and that won't be, it won't stay that way for long. But I also think there's an opportunity for the books potentially behind the scenes to be laying off that action with each other. And so I don't know the extent to which that happens today. But if you have one entity that's taken really heavy action on one side of a line, and they have the opportunity to lay it off at a favorable price somewhere else. There could be a kind of secondary market for the books that, again, I think the development of that would be really interesting. Have you factored in-game wagering into your projections? Great question. We have not, and you know, the idea is, I think that a lot of states have really brick and mortar only, and in-game is possible in a brick and mortar only environment, especially if we have the tablets like we talked about a minute ago. But it's so much more possible in an environment that's got an online or mobile component. So the questions that we asked folks, and frankly, we didn't expect the kind of overwhelming response from people. I certainly didn't expect. I don't even know if I've made reference to it on this webinar, but 41% of the people that we asked, you know, would you place a wager in the next 12 months? 41% said yes, and that number was like plus or minus 4% across the states that we surveyed, and so. You know, again, it was overwhelming, and so we didn't dive into the more nuanced things. We didn't ask about how often they would play parlay cards, and we didn't, you know, talk about in-game wagering. I do think in-game wagering is incredibly exciting, and I think it'll grow over time. But I still think the core business is going to be, you know, walking into your bodega to place a bet on the mats, or heading to your brick and mortar, you know, casino to watch the NCAA tournament in a sports book with friends, or in a convention facility with friends. You know, but good question. I think there's upside for sure there. Let's see. Agree the casino databases are very valuable. What do you think the customer lifetime value of a bettor will be in the U.S.? Good question, and I think I will punt on it. I haven't done the calculation. I think we have some data that could get us there, but yeah, I don't think that my off the cuff opinion is going to be the most valuable thing to share. So yeah, I'll pass on that, and with my apologies. Though I'll do a little digging if you want to reach out later and ask the same question. What was the male-female split of respondents? I've heard ranges anywhere from 70-30 to 50-50, so be interested to get your reference point. Yeah, it was not quite 50-50 in our study, but of the folks that passed the screener question that said, would you place a wager on one game or more in the next year, it was darn close to 50-50. See if I have the number right with me. I wanted to say that it was around 47 or 48%, something like that, female. So again, I don't have it sitting right in front of me, so yeah, I don't want to misquote you, but my recollection is that it was well above 45% female, which, you know, again, this is for people that are thinking about this from a sports betting perspective, they're going, wow, that's an astronomical number of women, right? This sports and sports betting in particular has just historically been perceived as a male endeavor. On the other hand, you know, 55% or thereabouts of our slot customers are women, right? And so the idea that now we're opening up the casino to a large number of men should also be really appealing to operators. This should be an opportunity for growth for the database from that regard too. Let's see, market sizing. What percent of respondents said they were likely to bet on sports if it became legal? Okay, that was 41% of the folks that we surveyed. Yeah, in terms of documentation, yeah, our plan is to white paper, you know, a good bit of this, but we're actively working on some projects right now, and so we don't have plans at the moment to make the data here publicly available while we're using it for commercial purposes. But again, I think we do plan to white paper some of this, especially as we start to aggregate data across several more states. As I alluded to earlier, as we work with clients and go out and do surveys in their markets, where they are allowing us, we'll bake some of that data into this as we think about developing the white paper, though we might not obviously put out information about their specific markets. Let's see. 40% of the U.S. 21 plus population betting on sports sounds like a pretty high number. Does that make you question the validity of the survey and that people were cheating the screener? It was absolutely a question that we asked. On the other hand, excuse me, I just look at the number of people that watch the Super Bowl, bet on the Super Bowl, and the idea that everybody would just have the ability to, the morning of the Super Bowl, go online and make a $10 wager if they wanted to on the outcome of the game, or that Tom Brady will throw more than 3.5 touchdown passes, or the jersey number of the first player to have a touchdown is even or odd, right? I mean, it's not a completely shocking number to me, thinking about, again, the number of people that play fantasy sports of any variety, whether daily or league-based. I know completely casual, and that's being generous, sports fans that are in fantasy football leagues for no reason other than social issues, but they're in a $200 fantasy football league. It doesn't strike me as odd that a large number of the population would place one wager if that were accessible to them and regulated. 41% may be high, but I don't think it's unreasonably so. Okay, let me see if I've missed questions along the way.
I'm seeing one at the top, Brian. What type of disintermediation do you see from fantasy sports?
What type of disintermediation do you see from fantasy sports? Good question. I don't know. I mean, that's the simple answer. I'm not sure what's going to happen with that. And we in the survey, I believe that we asked about gambling on fantasy sports, but as a more social and casual, as a subset of more social and casual type betting. Fantasy sports / Super Bowl squares with your friends / NCAA tournament, bracket, that kind of thing. So I don't know. It's a good question. I will say that the fantasy sports guys that I've talked to are really excited about this, and so they have an optimistic view, it seems. And I think there was one more question that just hit. When will this white paper more or less be available with the report? I don't know. It's not yet a work in progress. Again, as we're working with a fair number of folks right now on some market sizing and that, and I think our data is developing, our intuition is developing. As we see more and more markets and look at more and more hurdles to overcome in those markets, and also as we get a clearer legislative picture of what's going on. But we would certainly aim to get that out quicker rather than sit on it for a long time. We're excited about the data that we collected and that we're continuing to collect, and so we're looking to share that. Was the survey done for only adults age 21 and over? Yes. And I didn't mention it, but we had an additional screener. Again, we went to market with a market research firm, a survey firm, and they have a database that that lists age, but then we confirmed age prior to even giving an indication of what the survey was about. So we only took responses from 21 and up, and the 41% number that I referenced was of adults aged 21 plus that lived in the states that we targeted that said that they would place a wager on a sporting event in the next 12 months. All right.
It looks like those are all of our questions.
Cool.
Okay, so that concludes our webinar. Dave, Brian, thank you so much for your participation today. That was great. Attendees, we invite you to take our survey as well as visit us on theinnovationgroup.com to see how to join our mailing lists and follow us on social media. And thanks for joining, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.